Hello everyone, my name is Nootmad, and welcome back to the September edition of my new State of the Moze series. In this monthly series, I'll be going with the current state of the game, and more specifically, the state of Moze and how she plays. Within this series, I'll be covering some builds that I made throughout that month that didn't quite fit my criteria to warrant a separate build video, and I'll also cover how the hotfixes and DLC drops throughout the month affected Moze and her gear for her builds, as well as covering off any newly discovered interactions, knowledge, and so on and so forth that we might discover throughout the month. The point of this series will primarily be a sort of a monthly summary on Moze and her status in the endgame, as well as acting as a bit of a personal project for myself, just because I think it'll be pretty interesting just to catalogue and see how Moze evolves and adapts to the meta as the game's lifespan continues on. So, if you do find this video enjoyable or useful in any way, feel free to like the video and please subscribe as well if you're new to the channel. I've got a ton more content coming out that I'm sure you guys will find useful, so if you subscribe, you'll be notified about it. And yeah, with that, let's just get straight into the video, shall we? Alright, so September 10th saw the release of a 4th campaign DLC. I saw the return of our favourite Psycho in Psycho Krieg and the fantastic Fustercloak. And it actually brought us some incredibly shiny gear that actually had quite a significant impact on Moze and some of her builds. So, let's go over a few of the guns that I think are the best to use on Moze. There aren't many, but don't be dissuaded, these guns pack a serious punch. So starting off, the first weapon on this DLC weapon list is the Prompt Critical. It's a Torgue sticky pistol, and what it does differently to standard Torgue sticky pistols is its alternate fire mode. Actually, when you stick multiple projectiles on them, these explosions increase in damage and radius. So a standard Torgue pistol would only just increase the damage as the more stickies you put on an enemy, but with the Prompt Critical, the radius of the explosion increases. So when you combine it with the radiation element, like the one I'm using in the gameplay background right now, you can see that it creates really massive radiation explosions, as well as those radiation explosions can chain to other enemies, creating what's basically a blood explosion effect. I actually made a build about this, which I'll put in the top right right now. So if you're after a Prompt Critical build on Moze that kicks absolute ass, feel free to check that out. But yeah, Prompt Critical drops on Evil Lilith over in Castle Crimson in DLC 4 obviously, and can roll in any element, as well as the Anoints. I highly recommend getting either the consecutive hits Anoint or the 390 Anoint. It's up to you. I highly prefer the consecutive hits because the damage bonus can be maintained quite easily through damage over time, and yeah, you can keep it up to maximum damage more often than not. And yeah, overall, if you're after a really powerful pistol, highly recommend this. And yeah, definitely check this out. The next weapon on this list is the Patmark III. It's a TDR SMG, and is basically a gun with legs. It's a really powerful SMG, and honestly I dare say it's one of Moze's best TDR weapons to use right now. It can come in a homing version as well, and yeah, just really powerful mobbing and bossing weapon when combined with the right build. I haven't quite updated my TDR Moze build to level 65, but I'll be doing that soon, so stay tuned for that. But as far as the Anoints go, I'd recommend getting yourselves either the 390 Anoint or the consecutive hits. If I had to pick one for maximum damage, it would be the 390. So, much like other TDR weapons, this gun, when you reload it, counts as grenades, and therefore gets all sort of grenade bonuses and scales with that accordingly. And it can also crit because it's a grenade, and if you have the skill pull the Holy Pin on Moze, which allows grenades to crit, you can create your own Might Super Chains with that, and just really increase the amount of mobbing damage you can do. So yeah, honestly, it's a really powerful gun, and to get one for yourself, you just have to kill a Sponge Boss, who's one of our rare spawns in Castle Crimson. Be careful, this guy's very healthy, and by that I mean he has a lot of health, so make sure you have a decent build. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of time shooting him, and you might not even kill him. So, definitely check that out. Highly recommend this TD weapon, and honestly, it's quite quickly become one of Moze's best. So yeah, highly recommend checking it out. And the other weapon I want to cover off in this final DLC weapon section is the Lovable Rogue. Once again, it's another Torgue weapon, and what this does is the Jarrages have the chance to spawn a homing missile on explosions. So think of it like a lead sprinkler, for lack of a better term, in the sense that when you hit enemies with the projectiles, it causes projectiles to fly out, but these projectiles can actually home and deal a fair bit of damage. As far as I know, the Lovable Rogue is actually locked to just shock, so if you're expecting I guess a multi-element weapon, the Lovable Rogue isn't for you. But just because it's locked to shock doesn't mean it's bad in any sense. This gun actually does a lot of work, and because it's a Torgue weapon, it can actually deal a ton of damage because of the splash, which can scale and get bonuses like Skag Dent and Torque Cross Promotion, so you can really buff the damage quite significantly. This gun works best with the triple threat Moze build I put out quite a little while ago, well, not quite, fairly recently, sorry. I'll be putting the link to that in the top right now, so feel free to check that out. But yeah, definitely Lovable Rogue, really solid weapon. As far as the anoints go, I recommend either consecutive hits or 390, but because the base damage of this gun isn't so high, I'd much rather suggest the consecutive hits anoint instead. And to get one for yourself, you just have to kill Evil Brick, who's also in Castle Crimson. And yeah, that's about it for the few weapons that I wanted to cover. There are other weapons that came out with the DLC, but to be honest, I wasn't really, I guess, impressed with them. They were okay, but nothing too spectacular. The Major Kong was another notable example of it, but to be honest, the way it fires is just kind of weird, and I haven't found it to be very consistent in terms of its damage output, so I decided to ignore it for now. But I'm keen to hear what you guys think of the new DLC weapons, so feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, with that, we'll just move straight on to the next section of the video. Okay, so moving on from the weapons in DLC 4, we also got one new class mod each for each character, as well as 2 new shields to play around with. And actually, the class mod that came out with Moze, as well as the one of the 2 new shields, that being the Plus Ultra, have actually become a very core part of any Iron Bear build. So I know I've already spoken about both of these gear pieces in previous videos, so I'll be quick. We have the Plus Ultra Shield, and what it does is that it gives Moze, or the Vault Hunter generally, 25% bullet absorb chance, as well as 30% action skill cooldown rate. You can get yourself a Plus Ultra from Dr. Benedict over in the Benediction of Pain. And yeah, this shield is absolutely insane, especially if you get the multivitamin prefix, giving yourself extra HP, as well as the fact that the Plus Ultra also gives you extra HP. It's really, really good. This shield is honestly the best shield in the game right now for Iron Bear and even Moze, just because Iron Bear's armor scales to the maximum HP you get, and considering the fact that this shield boosts your maximum HP, even not including the multivitamin prefix that gives you extra health parts on the shield, but it also has a 30% action skill cooldown rate, which minimizes the downtime you get on Iron Bear, which in all honesty is one of the downsides of hybrid builds, is that sometimes you might not always get Iron Bear back at constant availability. But just because of how powerful that cooldown rate increase is, as well as the fact that if you stack on that cooldown anointment on the shield as well, you can really minimize the amount of downtime you have on Iron Bear. And as you can see in the background, and you'll see soon, once I run out of fuel on Iron Bear, I actually get it back really fast just after getting a couple kills, maintaining my topped off Guardian perk, and Iron Bear's back just within a few seconds, even after riding it fully. And so yeah, just makes it a really powerful shield to use for Moze. And now we'll quickly touch on the Flare class mod. This is once again the DLC 4 class mod that came out for Moze, and drops from Evil Mordecai and Castle Crimson. And what it does is it gives you gain up to 100% damage while Iron Bear is active. So this means that Iron Bear does 100% extra damage, as opposed to the Raging Bear class mod that only gives Iron Bear 50% damage. Now, the downside of the Flare, or the supposed downside, is that it doesn't give you much Iron Bear uptime because it doesn't boost skills like Deadlines or anything like that, nor does its passive actually do anything in regards to helping Iron Bear maximize its uptime, unlike Raging Bear that decreases fuel usage after every kill. But in all honesty, after the amount of times I've played both the Flare builds and Raging Bear builds, I've honestly started to prefer the Flare builds a lot more, because of the extra damage of Iron Bear, and as well as the fact that you don't really need an Iron Bear that lasts an excessively long time, and that's also sort of why I've dropped favor of the Bear Trooper class mod in lieu of the Flare class mod. And so yeah, overall, both of these two combined just makes any Iron Bear build perfect. You get a ton of damage from the Flare class mod, as well as a ton of survivability and Iron Bear uptime through the Plus Ultra Shield. Now we have that out of the way, let's move on to the hotfixes. Okay, so, now that we have the gear from the DLC out of the way, let's move on to the hotfixes and what weapons got buffed that actually turned out to be pretty decent on Moze. And rounding up the start of the list is the Chaos. It is a dual assault rifle and drops from the psychic abilities in the Embermire. And if you've already watched my previous build videos, you'd know how much I love this gun. This gun is an incredibly solid rifle, rolls in any element, and when you smack on the consecutive hits and with the right build, like my triple threat build that came out a few days ago, this build is absolutely insane, and even in the gameplay in the background you can see it does really well, and especially when you element match as well, the damage goes up even higher. Now, the downside of the Chaos, well, it's not really a downside, but it does sort of, I guess, limit the special effect of this gun, and that's because in order to proc the explosive nova that happens when you kill an enemy with the chaos, you need to get a kill with the gun itself. And this may sound a bit confusing when I say that, but what I really mean is that the gun has to kill the enemy without any special effects coming into play. So, things like Short Fuse and Skagden on Moze are damage skills and do extra things on top of your gun damage. So Skagden adds instant damage and Short Fuse just adds secondary explosion. If one of those two were to steal the kill, so if it was to do the final 1 HP damage to the enemy, you won't be able to get the special effect and the enemy's just going to die. So yeah, you're not going to get the special explosive effect off the gun. But that doesn't really make it as big of an issue. You can just abandon Skagden completely. I have done so, and I still get the special effect pretty frequently. And Short Fuse itself doesn't steal the kill as much as you'd think it would, but it still makes it a lot easier to use. But even if you did have Skagden, the chaos is still incredibly solid. It's a really fast firing weapon, does a ton of damage, and it just works really well. And moving on from the chaos, we also have the Breath of the Dying, also received a damage buff in that same hotfix, and much like the chaos, it also has the same sort of downside as the chaos. And as you can see in the background, no matter how much damage I'm doing, I'm very infrequently proccing that special effect where the corrosive orbs spawn out and kill enemies in the nearby area. So yeah, because I have Short Fuse and because I have Skagden, the special effect isn't happening. Now I found much like in the same vein as the chaos, abandoning Skagden doesn't help with the Breath of the Dying at all. Short Fuse, I don't know what the difference is, but I just found that the chaos works nicely when you abandon Skagden. Breath of the Dying does not. And so yeah, but that doesn't mean that the gun is bad in any regard. I know the enemies I'm versing have armor, and corrosive does an extra damage against that, but still the gun is incredibly solid, and I highly recommend getting one for yourself. And you can actually get one for yourself from the Blinding Banshee over in Desolation's Edge on Record of Fame. Now we have that part of the way, let's move on to the next section of the video, shall we? And now we have finally arrived at Nootmad's build of the month. I don't know if I'm actually going to call it this, but you know what, let's just go with it for now. And the build I'm going to be showcasing in today's episode of State of the Moze is my Face Puncher Moze build. Now, I don't really have a name for it, I haven't really put much thought into this, but it just seems that a lot of people have been using the Face Puncher recently, and I thought I might as well jump on the bandwagon too, and put my own spin on it. So, quite obviously, the guns we're going to be using is the Face Puncher, and contrary to what a lot of people typically tend to use, I'm completely avoiding things like URAD, and instead I'm suggesting anointments like the consecutive hits, or the 390. Now, for basic mobbing or takedowns for those mobs, I highly recommend using 390, but if you're bossing, the consecutive hits works more consistently, or if enemies are very, very tanky, the consecutive hits will also work wonders for you as well. So that's the Face Puncher out of the way, and those are the only two guns we're going to be using for this build. And moving on to the shield, we have one of two shields. In the gameplay in the background, I'm actually using a Faulty Star Shield, which is a DLC 4 shield, and what it basically does is whenever Moze, or whenever your character takes damage, you trigger a Nova that chains to an enemy and does some damage. Now, the reason why I was using this shield is because I had a few people in my Discord asking me to use it, so I tried it out, and you know what, it's not too bad. But if you truly want maximum damage, I also recommend using a one-shotter shield. Now, the anointer I recommend for either of the shields is the after exiting Iron Bear, kills increase Iron Bear's cooldown rate by 30%. That's because in situations where you want to be able to do more damage, this build also has Auto Bear, so having Auto Bear out and being able to slag enemies with target softening, you can be able to push your damage a bit more. So yeah, having that Auto Bear uptime is very, very useful. So that's the shields out of the way. As far as the class mod goes, we're using a Bloodletter. Now what the Bloodletter does is if Moze will be healed, she can shield regen instead. And because of the way the Face Puncher works, and the fact that it does melee technically, combine that with a Knife Drain White Elephant Relic, which Knife Drain gives you health regen on melee attacks. The White Elephant counterpart gives you a Sticky Bomb on a melee attack. So, when you shoot a Face Punch on an enemy, not only do you get health regen through the Bloodletter, which turns into shield regen, you can also get some extra damage out of that, out of the White Elephant Micronades, that actually scale with quite a few things, most notably Splash, Melee, and weapon damage. So, that's why it's really nice to have, and yeah, that's basically the relic and the class mode we're using. As far as the stat rolls go on either of those, obviously things like Splash damage, Melee damage, and mag size and access cooldown rate will be ones that you want to try and get yourselves on those gear. And so yeah, those are the 3 pieces of gear out of the way. And finally, for the grenade, realistically use whatever you want, as long as you have the on grenade thrower note. I've recently been taking a liking to the spring epicenter, so that's what I'm using right now. And yeah, that's basically the gear out of the way. And as far as the skill tree goes, something quite different, I'd say, to what I typically do. So let's just start off with bottomless mags. Now, I have spec'd down far into bottomless mags, but avoided forge, and that's for a specific reason. Mostly because the mag size for the face puncher isn't that high, and you aren't really going to get much benefit from forge. I have scorching RPMs to increase my fire rate as well as iron bite damage, which helps. You have rush and defensive as well. Now, because those white elephant nades count as damage over time, and also explode after a bit of a delayed time, you can actually sprint around after tagging an enemy with the face puncher, and those white elephant nades will actually give you healing, because rush and defensive gives you lifesteal when you're running, and that lifesteal HP goes straight into your shields and keeps it at full capacity. We also have Scrappy for the movements, with the weapon damage and handling, which helps a lot to be able to stay accurate while you're shooting enemies, and the extra weapon damage is nice to have. And we also have Click Click. Now, because the face puncher has a somewhat low magazine, you can actually keep this damage bonus quite consistently, and because we're not using things like a Deathless Relic or putting ourselves under low HP to get the most out of desperate measures, Click Click is somewhat of a decent alternative to have, and that's why we have it. So that's basically bottomless mags. And as far as blue tree goes, once again, nothing too special, but you may notice one glaring thing, and that is we don't have short fuse. And that's a one very specific reason, because the face puncher doesn't proc short fuse. Because it counts as melee, the face puncher that is, you can't really proc short fuse off a melee attack, so that's why the face puncher can't do that. So that's why I avoided it. Now, of course, you can pick that up just to make this build a bit more flexible, but if we're going all in on the face puncher gimmick, might as well not waste points, so that's why we avoided short fuse. And as far as that, everything else in blue tree is pretty standard. So yeah, nothing much else to say about that. And as far as red tree goes, nothing too spectacular here either. We have security bear to give auto bear a little bit more survivability. We have drowning and brass just to give us some extra damage, and we have full cannibal pass just to help us stay alive and also be a bit of a panic button. So that's the skill tree out of the way. And just a quick note about the shields as well. The reason why I want to use a one-shotter shield over another amp shield like the version 0.M or any other legendary amp shield is because the one-shotter shield works a lot better with multi-pellet projectiles, multi-pellet projectile weapons, so things like the face puncher, which have a ×14 variant. The damage with a one-shotter shield is applied evenly to each pellet, as opposed to something like a legendary amp shield like the 0.M, which divides the damage over the multiple pellets, so ultimately you're doing less amp damage with that. So that's why I highly recommend a one-shotter shield instead of a legendary amp shield. So that's the face puncher build out of the way. And with all that said and done, that wraps it up for the video. So if you made it this far, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. And just before I let you all run away, I just want to remind you guys that I actually stream on Twitch on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So if you want to join in and hang out while we test out random builds, mess around with takedowns, or just meme around in general, I'll be putting the link to my Twitch channel in a pinned comment down below. But yeah, with all that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!